G'day. In this video, we're going to try and understand some of the rules that TKINA uses to lay out widgets and your application. Let's have a look and see what happens. So here I've just drawn up a quick demonstration application, you might say. Just the layout of it anyway. So we've got this blue window here, which we can imagine that's our TKINTA window. That's our application window. And inside that, we've got two frames. They're in the red. And when we put those frames into TKInter, we're going to lay them out using a grid layout manager. So this would be column 0, column 1, and each frame would have its own column. But then again, inside each frame, we can use another layout. And this time on the left frame, we're using the pack layout. And we've got some buttons stacked on top of each other. And then again, another frame that would sit underneath that third button. And that frame can have a different layout manager again. This time it's using grid. So you can have a layout manager per frame or per container that can contain widgets. So over on the right hand frame in red, we've got some labels laid out with a grid and also a frame laid out with the grid. But inside that frame, we've switched to a pack layout manager again, and we're just stacking some images on top of each other. So you've got to understand that TKInter allows you to use different layout managers, but you can only use one layout manager per container. So in other words, in this red frame, all the widgets inside it would use the pack manager. So this widget would be packed, and this one, and then this frame would be packed. You can't have one widget using pack and then another widget using grid in the same container. You've got to be consistent within each container for which layout manager you're using. Okay, so it's a good idea to draw up your layouts. Pen and paper or pencil and paper is really easy and fast, but it helps you think really carefully. Where do I need another frame to lay out this grid? Where do I need to put another frame in here or another frame over there? Or am I going to pack these ones or use a grid for those ones? So drawing up your application really helps. And then not only do you have a hierarchy for your layouts, you also have a hierarchy for your widgets. And here's the same application, but these are just the widgets this time. Let's make it so we can see them both. So here's our application window. So that's like our TK application. And it has two children, and they are the red frames there. So those red frames are called the children of the parent object or the window. And if you were talking a bit to one of the children, one of the red frames, its parent would be the window. And this red frame has its own children. Here they are here, 3 buttons and that frame there. So that red frame is the parent of these ones in green. So in other words, this red frame here is the parent and these are its children, the 3 buttons and then this frame. And then this frame is the parent and all these option buttons in the slider are its children. Okay, so you have like a family hierarchy, often just called a widget hierarchy in TKInter. And every widget, except the very, very top one, the application widget, will have a parent. And some of them will have children. The ones that you can put other widgets inside, the containers, they're the ones that are going to have all the children. And you can use this hierarchy to go up and down through the levels of widgets and find out what their parents are or what their children are. And you can use that in your code all the time. So try and remember that you've got different layouts and a layout hierarchy, and then also different widgets with parents and children and their hierarchy. So let's just have a quick look at that in action. Very simple application we've got here. This is just going to be a window with 2 frames inside it. And it's a big window, but the frames are only taking up this top left corner. That's for a reason. So let's have a quick look at the code that goes with it. So our first frame is these top 4 buttons. There, each button, 1, 2, 3, 4, is in a frame, the top frame. And then buttons 5, 6, 7, and 8, they're in a bottom frame. So there are 2 frames. Here's the first one here. It's called frame top. And you can see in this code that it uses the pack manager. So these buttons are packed. And that therefore you get button 1 and then straight underneath it, button 2, button 3, button 4, because that's by default what pack will do. But you'll notice it's got a little bit of space on the side. That's caused by the second frame being wider. So this frame is a bit wider because it's got the buttons next to each other, obviously, I suppose you might say. But this time, we're using the grid. So one frame is packed and one frame is a grid. And here we've got, obviously, 2 rows and 2 columns. Column 0, column 1, row 0, row 1. And each button is just assigned to a particular row and column. So what you might think is, okay, where are the frames? Well, the frames are tightly wrapped around the buttons. So the first frame is basically on the edges of all the buttons, and the second frame is the edges of those buttons. And you can't see any of the frame. The buttons are taking up all the frame. They're filling all the frame. So by default, TK-Inter tries to shrink down your frames, your layouts, to fit the minimum amount of space, unless you tell it not to. So unless you give it some options to pack or some options to grid, you're going to see things like this where your layout's going to look a bit funny. So we're going to learn about these options for pack and grid in future videos. And we're going to start laying out our applications in a much nicer manner so that we can avoid having them look a bit strange like this one does. But for now, see if you can get one of these buttons to go all the way across and fill up this space. If you can manage to do that, that's a good little practice activity to do. Or you might like to put a bit of padding around these buttons so they're not just stuck to each other like that, but there's a bit of space around them. See if you could do those kind of things. That's a good way to learn a little bit more about how to use pack and grid. I think that's enough for today. Thanks for watching. Go and write some code because it's going to be really good for you to keep trying to learn how to use the pack and grid managers. They're fundamental parts of TK-Inter applications, and the sooner you get familiar with them, the easier things will get. See you in the next video.